Greetings, lore seekers, and welcome back to another episode of the Lost Archives. More Star Wars Legends lore. So today, I'm going to be talking about the Katarn-Commando class armour. This was essentially the armour worn by clone trooper commandos during the war, and even some ARC troopers. Now, as the name might suggest, it could be named after a certain Rebel-era hero. In actual fact, it's named after the Katarn, which was a carnivorous predator from the planet of Kashyyyk. Now, this armour was better at protecting the clones and was much more versatile than the standard Phase 1 clone trooper armour. However, it did suffer for the same problem as most Phase 1 armour. In the words of Scorch, a clone commando, I gotta thank whoever designed this Katarn-class armour for us. It's great stuff, but obviously they never thought we'd need to sit down. Ouch. Like with most Phase 1 armour, it was particularly difficult when you wanted to sit down. It was very uncomfortable for the clones, and eventually updates were made to it to compensate for this problem and make it more comfortable, as well as providing a number of upgrades for the armour. But the armour itself would weigh about 20 kilograms, and if you were to find this on the black market, you'd be looking at 100,000 credits. So this armour was well sought after and very well used, even if it was only created for those who had the Fett type body. As with all clone trooper armour, it'd have to be modified for anyone who wasn't a clone. So, to do a quick overview over the types of armour before I get into more details of each specification, the armour itself was designed for better protection of the clones. This was basically using different composites of plates, as well as chemical properties of those armoured plates, which would allow for better damage to be taken, as well as the inclusion of deflector shields in the armour. One thing that is also notable about each variation of the armour is the helmet is designed to have Bacta injectors inserted into it, meaning that while you're out on service or you're in the middle of a battle, you can use a Bacta dispenser to regain health. If you've ever played Republic Commando, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, as Bacta dispensers would be found around the battlefield, and you could just walk up to it, and then this thing would come towards the helmet, and you'd suddenly regain your health. The idea was to maximise the longevity of these specialised units. As a clone commando is better trained and in line more with the original gene template of Jango Fett, this armour would complement them amazingly in battle, allowing for them to use it to its full extent. I'll now go over the standard different bits of the armour before I talk about the various different variations. As with all armour during the Clone Wars, modifications were made and newer versions that were better were introduced. Though there is a version of Katarn armour that survived all the way up until the Galactic Civil War, though a lot of the lore I've read on this seemed to be that it was just called Katarn armour as a reference to the superior clone variant. So the helmet, well, the helmet was, as you know, more heavily reinforced, but it also had a heads-up display that would display all necessary information on the battlefield, as well as those in your squad maps, as well as a personal communication system for the squad. It also would show the health and location of each member of the squad. These helmets also came standardly equipped with specialised internal sensors that could detect the make, model, and relative accuracy of every weapon the commander would come across, even going so far as to change the format of the targeting on the heads-up display for the various different weapons. Once again, if you have played Republic Commando, you'll see this happen as you pick up the varying different weapons and various other things. Now, the helmet also, and this is across all variations of the helmet, had a built-in air filtration system and could also be used in very toxic environments, which is why you would see certain command units and commando teams being used in various toxic environments or even environments in a vacuum. The whole idea is essentially to send these guys in to do small-scale operations to try and sabotage the enemy. That could be anything from sending them into the toxic fume environment of a droid workshop, to even some of the more inhospitable planets that the Separatists owned and operated just using droids. You could send in one of these teams and they could plant several hundred det packs, get out and then blow it up before the droids have even realised. Well, I'm going to have to do a Let's Play Republic Commando thinking about it. At some point maybe. And on a final note on the helmet, they came equipped with a visor that was essentially a pair of electro binoculars and night vision goggles all in one. The idea was that in low light variants or being able to scout out enemy positions would be extremely useful to the commandos. So these suits had them all built in. This is primarily what probably drove up the cost, having all this equipment built in and the reinforcements of the defences of the armour. On that note, we're now going to move on to the body of the armour. Now the main advantage of this over regular clone trooper armour was it boasted reinforced duroplast plating, and this was able to make it more resistant to blaster fire and other anti-infantry weapons. This, especially with the Phase 2 variant, was this made them more resistant to shatter guns and EMP weaponry, which would be one of the ways in which you could try and negate some of the advantages of this armour system. But that wasn't where it stopped. It also included resistance to extremes of heat, cold, and how the suit could be fully sealed, allowing it to be operating in vacuums. Though I believe the Phase 1 variant of the Katarn armour could only survive about 20 minutes before, you'd be in a lot of trouble. And on a side note as well, the gauntlets of these armours had a retractable Vibro blade, so you could essentially stab things with the knuckle. A lot of you would probably be sitting there thinking, well, how's a blade going to do anything against a droid? Well, if I do the Let's Play of Republic Commando, you'll see how effective it can be, because the Vibro blade can cut through metal if it's got the right attachments to it. The whole point of it being a Vibro blade, not a regular blade, is it's been upgraded to the point where it can carve through metal and flesh easily, if you give it the right things. Right, moving on to the backpack. Now, the backpack featured various different things over regular clone trooper equipment. For example, it had specific armour cartridges and ammo types for many of the reconfigurable weapons that the clone commando would be carrying. The backpack itself could also be reconfigured for specific missions, such as extended oxygen tanks for aqua or spaceborne missions, a back to the dispenser so you could heal yourself on the go, and even more communications equipment so you could communicate over long distances. In some case, this would be allowed for subspace transmissions as well. Now, the backpack also would carry all your grenades, explosives, medicals, and ammo supplies that you would need, as well as perhaps some stealth gear and rations and stuff that you'd need for general survival in the field. Now, the backpack was also linked up to your heads-up display, telling you what was your active inventory at the time, which you would then see on the visor, which would be very helpful. Actually, something I've forgotten to mention about the visor as well, it does have a auto-clean function for the lens. So, for example, if you were battling a Geonosian and you popped out your little Vibro dagger in the gauntlet, and I'm blind as the Geonosian's blood has spilled all over my visor. Well, no, the visor will then suddenly do a little... all of it's gone, it's now clear. This could be anything from enemy blood to enemy oil from any of the droid combatants you have fought. And on that note, I am now actually going to move on to the various types of armour. So, as I've said, Phase Mark 1 Katarn armour was issued at the start of the Clone Wars and was what clones had primarily trained in, but like with many issues of the original Clone Trooper armour, it wouldn't allow you to sit down comfortably. It was not comfortable to wear. A lot of people assumed that this could have been due to issues with the Commando designs, and they didn't understand the human physiology. And to be honest, I can believe that, because a lot of the problems with the original Clone Trooper armour were due to them mirroring Kaminoan designs for armour and various things, but adapting them to human-like designs, and also basing them off Mandalorian armour, but not making them out the same materials. So, the Phase 1 armour, while very, very successful in ensuring the longevity of the clones, did seem to suffer from shatter guns and EMP blasts. Now, Omega Squad was known for making a lot of recommendations based on that from their various outings with the Separatist forces and tours of duty. And so, about 4 months into the war, about 4 months after the Battle of Geonosis, the Mark II armour was introduced. Now this armour was upgraded to deal with shatter guns and EMP weaponry, though it still wasn't comfortable to sit down in. That particular one was introduced with the Mark III Katarn armour, as well as having more resistance to blaster damage, as well as ordnance such as laser cannons and even some light grenades, as well as modularization into the armour. I believe this is also when Night Ops armour was first introduced. So Night Ops armour is essentially a variation of the Mark III armour that was typically painted black and used with a special stealth alloy. And this essentially shielded that type of the armour against sensors, and in a sense it made it nearly invisible to the naked eye. This was typically given to clones in various stealth operations where stealth was usually prioritised over loud missions where they would need to deal with certain enemies or hardened targets. And then we move on to what I call the Mark IV armour. Though to call this armour Katarn armour would be a mockery of all previous iterations, as this is a version produced by the Empire, who deliberately used lesser materials and not as good protection of their troops. This was essentially so they could save resources after a long war where usually you would experience a Great Depression. The Empire was able to stave this off by using cheaper armour. Now, the Katarn Mark IV armour, or the Imperial Katarn armour, was essentially just called that as a reference to that legacy of armour. It was very much reminiscent and resembled the Phase 2 clone armour and had some of the same upgrades as that. So it was more on par with Phase 2 clone trooper armour, but it was nowhere near as brilliant for the commandos as, say, the Storm Commando armour would be, or even the Mark III Katarn armour was. But I suppose being a Republic and an Empire are two separate things. You're going to have a lot more in costs with an Empire, so it's no surprise that some of the little guys in the Empire started to notice things changing. But anyway, this has been my video on the Katarn armour and its various iterations. If you like what you heard, perhaps leave me a like down below. Maybe leave a comment, we get discussion going, especially if I've missed anything, please let me know. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, and if you do, please consider hitting the share button and sharing this around, as that will help my channel continue to grow. And I do always like to hear little bits of lore that I might have missed on, because that does generally help me out as well. As always, you'll find all my various sources listed in the description below. And on one final note, take care, have a good day, and may the lore keepers ever be in your favour.